Hello and welcome to Empire-ish with me, Anita Anand.
It was the one thing.
William Dalrymple.
No, don't encourage it. Just stop that right away. We began this podcast, it feels like a million years ago now. I mean, it's 90 million downloads now, which we can't believe. Yeah, okay, you can encourage that. That's fine. But, you know, the whole premise of it was that we were going to talk about the rise of empires and the reason why they seem to combust, collapse. And we're going to start a new series very soon, looking way back at some of the earliest empires in human history. And what we want to talk about today, and we have just such a splendid guest, and I'll let you do the fawny bit, because you're very good. I love her, though, more. I do. We're going to be talking about... This is a period way before the Mughals, way before the East India Company, way before the Romans, way before anything else. It is the spontaneous combustion, it seems, at least if you look at the record, of the Bronze Age. Now, Willie, who have we got to talk about this, who I love more?
So I got completely obsessed with this. We started off, I don't know how many of you, hands up who heard our Gaza series, our 12-hour history of Gaza. Hooray! And this opened a whole series, a whole warren of rabbit holes, which to plunge down. But Joe was our wonderful guest on the beginning 2 episodes of the Gaza series, which put into perspective the extraordinary antiquity of the Palestinians and the fact that the name Philistines is preceded in Egypt by inscriptions in Medinet Habu in 1177, which talk about the Peliset. That in the Assyrians talk about the Palatial from about 800 BCE. That Herodotus, latecomer, the father of history, talks about Palestina, Syria-Palestina, geographical space. He divides the Eastern Mediterranean into Syria-Phoenicia, which is Joe's particular passion, and then the southern half into Syria-Palestina. So we first started going down this rabbit hole then, and I started reading Joe's work on this, and she reviewed a spectacular book by a man called Eric Klein, who's going to be coming on 3 times on this series to talk about his book 1177, and then his sequel after 1177. Because this is this extraordinary moment when Mycenae, Troy, Pylos, Tiryns, the Hittites in Hattusha, Ugarit, the whole southern half of the Mediterranean heads into Egypt. It's like a sort of Armageddon, which is of course also in the southern Levant, Megiddo. And these worlds which seem so incredibly sophisticated, stable, strong, wealthy, cosmopolitan, in as little as maybe 2 or 3 decades, disappear. And you're faced with a new dark age. And what is so exciting about Eric Klein's version of this story, which people have been discussing for a while now, but Eric has sort of crystallized it in just these 2 fantastic books, is the fact that it's a perfect storm of crises started by climate change. So it's beginning to sound a bit more familiar now, and that this precipitates movements of people.
I'm going to actually ask Joe a question.
You might even introduce Joe.
Yes,
I was enjoying myself.
I literally said, would you like to introduce Joe Quinn? Thank you so much for being with us.
Often mistaken for Emma Thompson.
Yes. Joe, I mean, apart from these very sort of modern concepts like climate change, I mean, one of the most modern concepts is globalization and interdependency. And this is one of the earliest examples of that. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, so we're looking at a world here that is all these huge empires in the Eastern Mediterranean, Western Asia. We've got the Hittites in Anatolia, not so famous now, but this massive military power going all the way over from Troy, from the Eastern Aegean, all the way over to what's now northern Syria, and down into the Levant. You've got opposite them, they're kind of great enemies, the Egyptians, controlling not just Egypt for much of the late Bronze Age, but the southern Levant, even kind of going up into the north, and also Kush to the south, sort of modern Sudan and even further south at some point. So the huge territories. Further east, you've got the Babylonian empires, the Kassites, you've got the Assyrians kind of rising on the horizon. So you've already got this extraordinarily kind of sophisticated, complex world of, immensely sophisticated architecture, production, that kind of thing, huge wealth, huge power, advanced agriculture, all of this. But the thing that really makes it special, but in the end, spoiler, is kind of dangerous for it, is that it's so interconnected, and that these kings, these great emperors, are writing to each other all the time in a common language. They write to each other in Akkadian, the language, the ancient language of Babylon, ancient even then.
Which becomes the sort of diplomatic language for the whole region.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like French, something like that. And they're writing to each other, and they're exchanging women. There's a lot of arranged marriages between the different kingdoms, and they're exchanging gifts, which are probably not very voluntary in most cases. But I think the thing that they're exchanging most of all, that is really powerful, is they're exchanging political capital. The fact that these emperors acknowledge each other's power, is one of the most important things, along with those gifts, the metals that build the armies, build the palaces, and so on. But the fact of recognition is absolutely crucial in this. And so you've got this tight world that you'd already call, I think it would be reasonable to call globalized, because we're covering, thousands of kilometers already, oceans, continents, and so on. But then there's this whole other world beyond that in every direction, as far as Afghanistan, as far as Britain even, as far as the tin mines in Cornwall, down to the south
Indus
of India.
Valley, sending
Indus
stuff
Valley,
in from here.
up to the Eurasian steppe. It's kind of amazing, where they invented the wheel, right? Inventing horse mastery, chariots, that kind of thing. And this whole world is in regular contacts with each other, and ideas are traveling. It's not just goods, it's not even just technologies, it's ideas as well. Everything from how to write things down, the idea that you maybe should write things down, or could, especially if you want to run an empire, it's quite useful. But also, how to be a man. How important is it to be able to actually ride a chariot, which is really hard, I imagine. That kind of thing.
The Hittites and the Egyptians do it differently, don't they? The Hittites have 3 people in a chariot, so that one person can drive while 2 people are fighting, and the Egyptians think that's rather namby-pamby, and that you should fire your arrows and steer the chariot at the same time.
They were real men back then. A question, though, if we're talking about globalization and powers, was there a superpower, if you like, among all of these?
I think, basically, you've got these... It varies a bit across time, but basically, Egypt, Hittites, and whoever's in charge of Babylon. They're going to be the 3... It's pretty equally balanced over time. There's always one who's kind of, alpha male at the time, but it's pretty equally balanced over time. And then you've got these sort of smaller people who are in touch with them, who are calling them brothers and so on, are kind of included in the gang. They're invited to the parties, literally invited to the party. So a lot of these letters are very petty. And one of them is about how the king of Babylon has failed to invite the king of Cyprus to the opening party for his new palace. And what's that about?
We get a lot of that at JLF, actually, people not getting to the right party. And
it's a bit like a giant JLF. But places like Cyprus, places that are very important for copper. Copper and tin are the crucial, they're the oil of this period.
And the weird thing is that tin, without which you can't make bronze, without which you can't defend yourself, is only available in Cornwall and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So if you're in the Mediterranean, somehow you have to get your tin from either of those places, or you haven't got weapons.
Yeah. Well, and that's the delicacy of the whole sort of lace-like structure, isn't it? Because if one of those bits, if you rely on tin, and that dries up, or there is some kind of climate catastrophe, which means the grain that you trade to get all of the things you need to survive, if that link is broken, things come crashing down.
It's incredibly fragile. I mean, I think this is true. This is a bigger point about empires. Any empire. I shouldn't say any empire, because I'm sure there are exceptions. Most empires, they're conservative. The more territory you have to control, the more people you have to control, the more conservative you have to be, the more you have to rely on tried and trusted individuals, methods, standards, and so on. You can't move. Sclerotic, an empire often, very bureaucratic. And that's the problem here. This is amplified by the fact you've got these conservative, sclerotic empires who are also depending on each other.
And a lot of these empires, or maybe all of these empires, have in common the fact that you have a palace at the center of things. And the palace has a staff, and it has a group of scribes who are writing these Akkadian letters to each other. But it's also got people sort of stacking wine in the cellars, making sure that the peasants are bringing in their tithe of olives or whatever it is from and around these, as Stephen Fry said on your session a couple of days ago, a lot of these palaces have a hearth in the middle, and that people are gathering around this hearth. The Greek palaces in particular, Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns. Talk a little to that.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you bring up Mycenae and Pylos and Tiryns. So these are kind of quite small kingdoms. These are the great Greek kingdoms of the Bronze Age, the kingdoms of the Trojan Wars and so on. But actually, historically, they're the kind of Western barbarians. They're never mentioned by Pharaoh at any point. They're not in the correspondence of these great brother kings. Or even Cyprus is a member of it.
Pharaohs don't even bother mentioning the Israelites, do they? There's
No. This is they've got a high standard for paying attention, and I'm afraid nowhere kind of in the Mediterranean area really makes it, apart from Cyprus because of all that copper. But what happens in these sort of smaller kind of city-states, but they're also kingdoms, and they know about these bigger empires to the east. And in some ways, they copy them, but they don't actually go and visit. They don't get invited to the parties, so they don't know what the palaces look like. So they know they've got to have a palace, but actually, the Greek palaces with these hearths, they're not that big, actually. They're beautiful ones to visit in Mycenae and Pylos still.
Pylos is on a beach and gorgeous.
It's just brilliant.
Great place for your summer holiday.
It's so gorgeous. But they're relatively small, fascinating, and they're absolutely, particularly Mycenae becomes the biggest and most important one of them. It might even take over the others. That's a bit unclear because they do write things down. They write in an early form of Greek, in fact. They write it down in a script called Linear B, which is best suited for counting sheep and not very well suited for explaining the administrative structure of an empire. So they start this fashion of having the palace with the hearth at the center of it and a kind of throne room and so on. And then gradually, all the other palaces in Greece, the other kings of Greece, kind of copy them. And it's really interesting because this is the story of the Trojan War, right? The other kings follow Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae. He's not...
We'll do the Trojan War in a second. Just before we get there, below this kings and the palaces, and slightly to one side of them, you've also got this world of merchants. And particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, in your area, in sort of Lebanon, Syria, you've got these guys whose names we know, who have their own little administrative world of scribes, and they're sending out big boats, and occasionally those boats go down, and we can excavate them.
I know what you're thinking about, the floating department store.
The floating harrods.
This is a great... The shipwreck of Alubaran. Tell us what we saw in that. That's amazing.
This is incredible. This is a ship that goes down around 1300 BCE, off Cape Uluburun in southern Turkey. And it's a time capsule. So it's preserved its full cargo. And this is going to be one of the biggest ships. It's about a 20-tonner. It's got 10 tons of copper on it. It's got 1 ton of tin. So that's the perfect ratio for making bronze. So that's a major part of its cargo. But it's also got Baltic from the amber. It's got ebony and ivory from African ports.
Lapis from Badakhshan.
A gold scarab from Queen Nefertiti. I mean, is that...
It's got her seal on it.
Right.
So whether it's a fan or whether it's actually hers. It's not very clear. But this, the way it's been loaded, 'cause you can even see this, of course. It's laid out on the seabed. The way it's been loaded, it must be travelling west. So it's travelling towards the Aegean, and it's bringing all this stuff, all this bling, basically, to somewhere like, maybe it's Rhodes, maybe it's Mycenae, maybe it's Crete. We don't know because it never got there. Somebody was disappointed. But it's the level of stuff that it's being from all over the world in such huge volume that it's being sent to, as I say, a relatively unimportant part of the kind of known world at that time.
Right. And you described it as a JLF family. And this doesn't happen at JLF, but one would think with this kind of interdependency, and you're describing something that is perfect when it's in perfect harmony, but they surely do fall out. And what do we know that they fall out over?
So they fall out a little bit over things like RSVPs. Also, the king of Egypt, the pharaoh, never sends anybody enough gold. One other king actually complains to Pharaoh's mum that Pharaoh had sent him these gold statues and he had them melted down to check, and it was gold plate. That's a little bit, but the real thing...
He doesn't say to Pharaoh, he writes to mum.
Yeah, he writes to Pharaoh's mum.
Your mean son.
He's been a very naughty boy. Yeah.
But then on a much bigger scale, like with their armies, their bronze weapons and so on, they fall out over territory. So the Hittites and the Egyptians are constantly fighting over the Levant. The Hittites are also at the same time fighting various Mesopotamian empires further east. They beat them from time to time, but then another one, it's like whack-a-mole, another one rises up, and that's how we get the Assyrians at a certain point. The poor Mitanni, who everyone's forgotten. The Mitanni are really cool.
Who worship Vedic gods, who worship Indra
Yes.
and Mitra and all sorts of gods that are very familiar here. And they're in the middle of Mesopotamia.
Yeah, but they get hit on the head by the Hittites. Hittites go home for a bit of R&R, and then the Assyrians turn up in exactly the same space. So you've got this kind of... It's almost at the war, and the war, of course, gives them something to do with their bronze. So there's a kind of economic aspect even to this as well.
If you've stocked up on arrowheads, might as well. Also, we do know that they fall out. We know that from, sort of collections of weaponry. But we do know they make up as well. We know a surprising amount about how they make up because there are peace treaties that... Tell us about that, because I find that fascinating.
I mean, the kinds of documentation that we have from this world are extraordinary. The earliest law codes from
The point
Mesopotamia.
being that it's written on clay, and so if you have a fight and your palace goes up in flames, it's not like later on when you've got books which burn, the clay tablets fuse.
Get harder.
They get harder.
Yeah.
So at this period, we know everything. Every time anyone attacks a palace, the library survives.
Yeah. And even in Egypt, they're writing there on stone. They haven't got the clay to the same extent. But again, that's one of the things that survives. So we're really lucky. But in terms of peace treaties, so one of them is what's called the Treaty of Kadesh. There's a huge battle between the Hittites and the Egyptians over the Levant, as usual, in 1274 BCE. It's kind of a draw, one way, maybe about 50,000 people on each side. We're talking a really major encounter.
The Hittites ambush Ramesses II, isn't that? Yeah.
That's certainly Ramesses II's view. It takes them 15 years to work out a treaty. So this isn't just a kind of something that gets slapped together to get everyone home. They really negotiate for 15 years to get this thing that's now known as the Treaty of Kadesh, even though it's 15 years later. And it kind of divides up the Levant. It probably isn't the first peace treaty that was ever, signed in the history of the world, but it's the first one that survives. So it's really important.
Do you know, you talked about Mithras and the other gods that are portable somewhat. Can you tell me a little bit more about how they felt about each other's religions and how...
Good.
And also, you've got a corker of a story about Mrs. Yahweh, which I would love you to share. Okay, so, first of all, would gods be welcome to cross thresholds?
Absolutely. They don't. The thing is, people don't exactly think about gods in this era as belonging to their society. Whenever they have their own gods, they might have a city god, but basically if they meet a god, they're probably powerful and you want to be good to them. So if you go to a town, whether you're there as a king or a trader or whatever it might be, the first thing you want to do is go to the local sanctuary and, basically greet the local god, try and make friends with them, bring them an offering, do whatever you're supposed to do there.
Which is very familiar to people in this country, where
Absolutely.
you have different versions of the main gods with local names across the country.
Exactly, and then you work out which of the gods you're familiar with is most like this god, and then you're going to basically treat them as a version of it. So that happens. Egyptian gods are worshipped in the Levant, all sorts of gods found in Egyptian temples. We're just earlier this morning talking to Sanjoy Roy and Ruben Montoya about the Berenike Buddha. This is a little bit later, but an Indian god found in an Egyptian temple in Egypt, an Isis temple, built by an Italian. So just these things are extraordinary. But you also get, there are wonderful stories about this. So we think now, we talk about, there are Greek gods and Phoenician gods and Egyptian gods. But there's a wonderful guy called Philo of Byblos. He's actually writing in the Roman period, but he's writing about ancient Phoenician, ancient Levantine myths. And he says that, the thing is, all these gods, they're all they learn it all from the Egyptians. All these Phoenicians, these Levantines, they get all their gods from the Egyptians. And then he starts describing these gods. He says, El, king of the gods, he founds the city of Byblos, and he gives it to Baltis, who's another Levantine god. So that sounds fine, Levantine god, finding Levantine city. Then he founds the city of Beirut, and he gives it to Poseidon. Well, hang on, what's he doing giving a Greek god Beirut? But anyway, there we go. Then he gives Athens to Athena. You're like, hang on, you're really going outside your jurisdiction here. But this isn't a problem. This is this complete kind of mashup in their view of what gods do.
In October, I went to
so
Turin, where there is, again, anyone going to Italy, somewhat surprisingly, one of the world's great Egyptian museums is in Turin. Early kings of North Italy were great sponsors of kind of looting expeditions.
Can I just warn people, if you do this, there is an entire room of mummified cats, and it's very distressing. There's also a lot of mummified people, but that's less problematic.
But in one cabinet, there is a picture of something, again, very familiar to people here, a goddess on a lion. Now, we obviously think that's Durga when we see it in this country. But there's a whole tradition of goddesses riding on felines of different sorts in the Middle East, and it starts there. And in this case, it's a Canaanite goddess. And she's shown stark naked, riding on this, with two very excitable Egyptian gods, very pleased to see her, shall we say.
They like cats. Okay.
There's no cat in this picture.
A lion. They like lions. Okay. Yeah.
And
just big
I immediately sent a WhatsApp to Joe asking who is this Canaanite goddess, and it turns out there's a whole world of all these early Canaanite deities who are rubbing up against the Israelites and the early Israelite god Yahweh. And there are many scholars who believe that Yahweh in this early version has a wife called Astarte. Or Ashraf. And also that there are these Canaanite gods which, from the eyes of the later Israelite writers of the Bible, become literally demonized. So one of them is the god of a star god, an astral god, who is called Lucifer. Lucifer starts off as a Canaanite deity who the Israelites turn into a demon,
and there's
then
a continuity
into the
because he's the bearer of light. So, it is exactly the same iconography as Lucifer, morning star.
Likewise,
so it talks about in the same ways.
Beelzebub, another name for the devil in Christianity, the Lord of the Flies in Hebrew, is originally a form of Baal, who is a Canaanite deity. So you have these Canaanite gods who are demonized quite literally and turned into...
So, I mean, we, as usual on Empire, we've not done what we said we were going to do, which is half the time talk about the empires and half of the time about the demise. Right? So I mean, since you've helpfully pointed out this was the era in which the cart and the wheels were created. When did the wheels come off this cart? Because we are talking about the destruction of this lace-like interdependency. How does it start?
So probably the first kind of big bit of news. Maybe it's the Venezuela equivalent. We're not got to Greenland yet. The first bit is the Hittites kind of collapse. And they're a kind of semi-nomadic people coming in from the north who are fighting them. They're fighting people to the south in Syria, Mesopotamia. And that it just all gets too much. And they basically abandon their capital at Hattusha near modern Ankara. That's in the early 12th century, about maybe somewhere around 1190.
And by this stage already, we have evidence that Troy has had a big battle.
Around about the same time. This is all happening around. And it's kind of difficult. You can't get it. We're within a few decades here. After Hattusha has been evacuated, basically, then people come and loot it and destroy it. So this is a kind of different sort of world already. Then Egypt starts losing its territories in the Levant and south of Egypt, in Kush. Then you get all these extraordinary destructions around the Aegean, the Mediterranean itself. So these Greek kingdoms, they get burnt out.
First of all, they refortify, so they're anxious that someone's coming.
They know something's up.
And there's references
walls,
to watchers of the sea. So they've got sort of people on some headland looking out, waiting for someone coming.
And there are letters from Ugarit, this amazing trading kingdom in Syria. And you've actually got the letters where they say, first of all, we've heard that there are ships up on the Turkish coast. We're really worried. Are they coming from us? And they get a letter back going, I think you should be really worried. And our ships are somewhere else. We can't help you, from Cyprus. And then and there's another letter saying, oh, my God, they're literally coming for us. And that's one of the ones that gets burnt in the fire. It's probably pirates. We don't know who they are. So it's a whole...
Six ships.
Yeah,
so it's quite small. I mean, it's not like it's 100,000 men or something.
No, this is it. This is the problem, that there's no one big bang. It's all these small things that at the time must seem manageable, but when it's happening to all these kingdoms at once, a battle with some enemies here, some pirates here, you have a revolution maybe in Mycenae, that's a possibility.
A failed harvest.
A failed harvest. Some earthquakes. There's a lot of earthquakes in this period. People have even called it an earthquake storm. And of course...
And then you get this coalition of all these different pirate groups. And we have, first of all, a reference to these guys coming together and trying to attack Egypt from where they're not expected, which is the Libyan coast. In other words, coming from the left field. And they're defeated. And then they come down from what's now Israel, Palestine, down into the Delta. And that battle we know a lot about.
Well, I mean, the thing that we know about, the problem is what we know is what we're told in Egyptian inscriptions, which tell us far more than anybody else. So there are these cunning people, they're coming from the sea, they're based in islands, trying to make them very mysterious and unknowable. There probably are some kinds of pirates.
They've got horned helmets.
Some of them in the pictures. The Egyptians do pictures of these terrible people too. So some of them have horned helmets. So we only have this kind of one instance in what was no doubt a long campaign of attacking places. Certainly a lot of places burned down. These people or versions of them, combinations of them, may be responsible for it. But we don't know who these people are, really. And one thing about pirates is pirates really thrive under globalization. Basically, you need good trade going on. You need people to attack. And you also need a kind of people to be confident enough in international shipping. They're not going to spend too much time focusing on getting rid of pirates. So one of the things very interesting about this sort of sea peoples or pirates, whatever they are, is that they kind of do themselves out of a job. And so then you start to hear about Peliset and so on in the southern Levant. And one of my theories is, and there's no way of proving this in the current evidence, but these are quite possibly people who are going home. Mm. You know, they've had their run out on the sea, probably trading and pirating and privateering and all these things that kind of melt into
Sounds
each
like
other.
the East India Company, frankly. Same model.
And then at a certain point, it's all gone too far. Those ships are no longer sailing. Those ships that would have provided them an attack. You know, they've had a go at the king of Egypt. They've looted there. And there's nothing more to do. And so that's, I think, when you begin to get people settling back on the land again.
So, I mean, I find this completely fascinating because it is a gradual, but in a short space of time, system failure is what we're seeing. The lights sort of go off on the panel. But the effect of that, we were talking to that there, Stephen Fry, about, the Homeric tradition. It seems as if writing, for a while, just disappears overnight. And what you're left with, then, is a really strong oral tradition, which is why a lot of those, the Iliad and the Odyssey, they are an oral tradition that is passed down because everyone, forgets to write, doesn't write the same way? I mean, how does that happen?
Okay, I have views on this.
Oh,
Okay, a
good.
lot of people, so let's just talk about, you could talk about this honestly, writing either disappears or gets much less common all over this whole world we've been discussing. But let's just talk about Greece. So in Greece, people do write down Greek in the Bronze Age, as Linear B. They're using it mostly for accounts, for taxes, for managing agriculture and so on. They're not writing down their stories. They're clearly telling, because there are occasional mentions in relation to sanctuary taxes and so on, of gods who carry on. Zeus, Poseidon, Dionysus even. These are gods who are there in classical Greece 1,000 years later. They're carrying all the way through. The story of the Trojan War itself, the story that we have in Homer's version in the Iron Age, there are even words in it that are basically Bronze Age words. There are flat roofs. Some of the plot points depend on people falling off roofs they're sleeping on, but nobody's sleeping on those kind of roofs in the Iron Age when it's written down. So all this stuff, this element, not the whole story, but loads of elements of it seem to come down. So it's incredibly strong oral culture. And so people often say, okay, writing disappears in Greece, among other places. This is really sad. This is part of the story of the Dark Age. These people become illiterate. They lose writing. They forget how to write. I think it could be a really sensible decision to lose writing for them. Writing is the way they were controlled by the palaces. Writing was the way their taxes were. Writing was how their censuses were done. Writing is how their sheep were counted, how the weight of their grain was managed, and so on. And actually, we go to a society after that, lots of depopulation, but also a much more equal society. So there's far less international trade in the 2 centuries after all these disasters and collapses, but it's happening in far more places, being done by far more people. So it's a much more it's a sort of shock equalization of society. And I think if you want to, if you kind of like that and you prefer, or enough of you prefer to live in a society like that than a society with a massive king who can come and knock you on the head whenever you have worked, you can't get any more work out of you, then you're actually not going to want writing. Writing is bad for you. You don't need it, because you don't need it for your stories. You don't need it for your knowledge. And so in a way...
So you stop reading books and you go get audiobooks instead?
Well, it is... I think writing is quite dangerous, actually. And I do wonder if podcasts and audiobooks are actually a bit
we are the
better
saviours of the universe. It is true. Tell your friends. Just after the collapse of that Bronze Age that you've described, do we have a situation where, the power is much more balanced as well between these different areas? Is there a dominating force after that?
Well, it's more that these areas kind of shrink back into themselves a bit. So you still have an Egyptian kingdom, but it becomes much smaller. It's less, not unconnected.
It's
less
in Egypt
connected.
rather than
It's in
all
Egypt.
over
Right.
Israel, Palestine, and Iraq and Syria.
Exactly. The Mesopotamian kingdom, it's between the 2 rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Hittite kingdom doesn't really come back, but you get other smaller kingdoms. You also have some fascinating experiments in politics at this point. You have these tiny kingdoms that move constantly. You have these city-states in the Levant. Now you have the Philistines down the southern Levant, who are these quite big cities, and then you have these, but they're not really, they're not as importantly trading cities as the ones to the north, the Phoenician cities, who are trading right across the Mediterranean or to the Atlantic coast of Spain and so on. So you get a world of. So that it is still connected, but the components are much smaller.
So I love this counterintuitive thing, that actually losing writing could be better for the people. I mean, it goes against everything that
Don't
you
tell
kind of
my
feel in your
students.
soul. It's fine. The other thing is that, is there an argument to be had that when you've got this kind of multiple Brexit going on and everyone's sort of leaving the stage and retreating to their own spheres of interest, that diplomacy becomes better because it becomes more important? I mean, does that happen? Is that possible?
Well, one thing I would say that you see in the following centuries is the power of wine becomes much more important. So when these people are kind of going across the Mediterranean...
Very JLF.
Seriously. You start to see they're bringing not just jars of wine to make friends, that's kind of normal, bringing a bottle to the party, but they're bringing vines. They're bringing better wine into places like Spain and Italy and so on.
And the best wine of all is in Gaza.
Right, they're bringing stuff from Gaza.
Gaza is the Chateau Yquem of, and the Egyptians put a monopoly on it.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So this is exactly the kind of wine that is now being introduced across the Mediterranean. So I wonder if that's part of that, actually, that you no longer can do diplomacy by default
or just relying on the fact that you always have.
Exactly. Yeah. You now have to actually make an effort to get to know people. And the best way to do that is to bring a bottle.
Well, as always. Look, we've got about 8 minutes left of this session, so we're happy to take questions. Please put your hand up. Remember, the shy hand is the enemy of joy. So if you have a question, please put it up really high and wait till a microphone comes to you. There's one over there. Can somebody get one microphone on this side? Please leave it up, otherwise I'll never find you again. Right, okay. And there's an orange arm of great distinction going up. So give him, you'll be number 2. Okay, so let's go to you first of all. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, take the microphone. You'll lose your chance forever.
Hello.
Come on. Okay.
Thank you for this engaging discussion, and I basically soaked in every word. So I was curious to know if you've thought about how all of this whittling down of empires and destruction of these big kingdoms, how does that relate with what is happening today?
Everyone's thinking it. Let's face it.
Very good question. So I think there is, I think you could see this interconnected world of the Bronze Age. It's a little bit like NATO, right? Which is facing the same, you get your sort of bit of infighting and so on, but basically it's an idea that we're kind of better together. And that, and it's hard to notice when that is really broken. And by the time it has completely broken, you're in a state of emergency. And it doesn't take much. This is the thing. I think sometimes we're thinking about the end of the Bronze Age. They're looking for huge things. They're looking for, we need to have an earthquake storm, and we need climate change, and we need the connectivity, and we need this, that, and the other. We need the tin route to be broken down in both directions by forces of which we know nothing. And that may well all be true. It may well all have happened. But it may just be that there was one crazy person who was not prepared to play by the rules.
Also, very important, we haven't perhaps talked about it, there is massive climate change. This may have been precipitated initially by a massive drying out of Central Europe, sending refugees southwards into Greece and starting a whole domino effect of people in boats, migrants heading off.
That's one of the theories, certainly. The problem is there's no actual evidence for it. But
Eric Klein talks about stalactites that show this happening.
Yes, there's definitely climate change. I would say that I think the thing about which there certainly is evidence, the problem with climate change is when you're looking for it in antiquity, you're always looking in one specific place. It's like what happens in this lake, what happens in this cave, what happens in this, and it's quite hard to join the dots. I think now we're getting so much evidence, so you really can join the dots. But it's not just in Europe, it's across the whole piece.
Right.
But I would say climate change doesn't necessarily explain why the empires collapse. It might well explain why people don't build them up again.
We're going to take a strident orange arm, as I like to call you, sir. Oh, what happened? You lost it. Okay. Has anyone got a microphone for this gentleman over here on this side? Anyone on this side? And we'll get a microphone. Yep, that one over there. And again, some of you are doing the hover, and then it goes. So just put them up high. There we go.
You have said about how empires fall. Is there any similarity between how democracies will fall or how democracies fall?
Okay, all right. And if I do an add-on, are democracies more resilient?
This is a great question. I will say this: democracies tend to be smaller. Democracies actually work that aren't just called democracies.
In the ancient period.
I think in the modern period as well, actually. Real democracy...
Careful, you're in the world's largest democracy here.
Yes, okay, so perhaps I'll stick to the ancient period and people can make their own conclusions. In the ancient period, democracy tends to work best in smaller, and that's actually even kind of economically more challenged environments where it's more difficult for one person, one family to kind of seize the means of production, essentially. And so I think in general, smaller polities in the ancient world do tend to be a little more resilient, unless you actually burn down the entire palace. But so I think there is something a little bit different going on, but in the end, so often what's called a democracy is actually a form of oligarchy. And I'm going to say that is ancient and modern. And
Right.
so, yeah.
I love how edgy you've become. Can I just say, all this edgy stuff going on stage, and I've just cast my eye to the front row here, and there are two gorgeous people knitting all the way through.
I love that. I've
you've
been
got
watching it all the time.
Existential
What are you
crisis
making,
up here, and
ladies?
something very comforting going on there. It's really good.
What
There's
are you
one,
making?
So
Brilliant.
it's something for her granddaughter. It's lovely. It's like having a hug when you're feeling quite scared. OK, there's a gentleman there with the sunglasses. Stand up so they can get a microphone to you, sir. And I think that might have to be the last one. There we go. Great.
Okay, so there's one commonality I found between what I heard here and the gig economy session in Darbar Hall right before it. So they were talking about how people are going to start getting tired of ordering everything online, and they're going to start seeking out the markets more and the stores more and the physical connection more. And you guys talked about how people stopped using writing because they saw that it was being used to control them. So how do you think it's going to connect with the real world right now, where technology is basically controlling everything?
Yes, Joe, tell us. Are people going to stop all...
Should I put down my phone? Yeah, that's a great question. It is actually a brilliant question. And I have a horrible feeling that it would be helpful for the common good if we all spent a bit less time scrolling. But not listening to podcasts. Podcasts are great. Podcasts bring us together. They're wonderful.
The time that you would have spent scrolling, you should listen to EmpirePod. Very clearly.
Can you tell why Joe is one of our favourite guests? Absolutely. Listen, thank you very much. It's so interesting and so challenging. Thank you so much, Joe.